Great to see you guys. Thank you for being here, and also great to have those of you online join us for worship. Always fun to be in worship together. We're doing a sermon series about how living sacrificially for Jesus is harder, but it's also more rewarding. Because as we've been saying all along, living sacrificially is not deprivation. It's letting go of something, often good things, so that we can experience God's better things. And so many of you are doing this. So many of you are living sacrificially. So I'm just going to say at the beginning, this particular sermon is not a get out there and do more sermon. This is a well done, keep going sermon, because so many of you are living sacrificially, and it's worth it. There is a reward. There's a man in my sermon review team who will frequently ask when I present my sermons to them, he'll frequently say, "That's fine, Scott, nice sermon, whatever, but what's in it for me? Like if I do what you're saying, what's in it for me?" Which I'm gratefully asked that question because I think he's just saying what the rest of us are too shy to say, right? What's in it for me? Especially because sacrificial living can be hard. I mean, after all, sacrificial living requires sacrifice, which doesn't always feel good, especially when the sacrifice feels like a sacrifice, because sometimes there are sacrifices we make where the better thing is so clear to us, we willingly give up stuff, we willingly make sacrifices to get to that better thing because it's so clear and it doesn't feel like a sacrifice. Last week, my oldest daughter called me, and as soon as I answered the phone, she said, "Daddy," and then she started to cry, and she was having some painful relationship stuff going on. I hate it when my kids are sad, especially when they cry. And that's true for my son, and it is really true for my daughters, who have me wrapped around their finger like nobody's business. And she lives in Orlando, and we were like 3 minutes into the conversation, and I said, "Do you want to come home?" And she said, "I do, but I don't have the money." And I said, "We'll pay for it." Right? Because that's kind of how I am with them. Right? She's crying, make it stop, here's a plane ticket, here's a new Gucci bag. Like, what do you need? Like, just, make it stop. Well, because it was last minute, it was also kind of expensive. And my wife said, "Wow, that was a lot of money." And I was like, she was crying. As though that just settles it, right? To neither of us did that feel like a sacrifice, because the good thing we got in return was so clear to us. But sometimes things really do feel like sacrifice. To say or do the right thing at school or work, knowing it might make you unpopular. To give up something we really want so that someone else can have it. To give time and money in order to further God's rescue mission in the world, especially if we give it not out of our excess, but in ways that actually kind of limit our lifestyle and what we can do. Is it worth it? The sacrifices you're making, do you ever ask that question? The sacrifices you're making for friends, for family, for Jesus, do you sometimes wonder, is it worth it? Is it worth it? I want to read to you one of my favorite passages in the Bible from the Apostle Paul's second letter to Timothy. And Paul's in prison. He's been in prison before for telling people about Jesus, which was illegal. But this time, he knows he's not getting out, and he knows he's going to be killed for his faith. And he does what most people do when they know that death is near, either because of disease or age or whatever. It's called life review. Most people do it, right? The highs, the lows. Did I make a difference? Did I matter? And he's writing to his good friend Timothy. So he's a little more honest and transparent about some of the hardships he faced than he might be in a public letter. And these are almost certainly the last words that the Apostle Paul ever wrote. And he says, "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. Do your best to come to me quickly. For Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, and my scrolls, especially the parchments. Alexander the metalworker did me a great deal of harm. At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. Do your best to get here before winter. The Lord be with your spirit." And those are the last things that Paul ever wrote. And he's reviewing his life, all the hard work, the sacrifices he made, the times he was rejected, beaten, thrown into prison for talking about the good news about Jesus. And he's saying, was it worth it? Was it worth it? And his answer isn't quite the script that Hollywood would write, because he is pretty honest about some of the hardships of sacrificial living. So I'm going to go back over these verses a little bit at a time and just point out some of those hardships of sacrificial living, but more importantly, why it's worth it. Because key to sacrificial living is not to focus on the sacrifice part, it's to focus on the bigger and the better thing God gives us as a result of our sacrifice. In other words, what's in it for me? So Paul starts strong. He says, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." So what is the good fight? Well, in the original Greek of this passage, the words used, they have a military connotation. So he's saying, I have battled the good battle. Not just any old battle, the good battle, the right battle to fight. I fought the fight that really matters, which he defines in other places as a spiritual battle, to experience Jesus' love ourselves, and then to participate with him in healing this world so that others experience Jesus' love, and what's broken in our world gets mended. That's the good fight that he fought. Then he says, "Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day." So here's one of the ways that sacrificial living is worth it. Paul says, in living sacrificially for Jesus, he has become so real to me that I am not afraid even of death, because I know death just means that I'm going to get to be with him forever. No guilt in life, no fear in death. This is the power of Christ in me. This is what he gets out of his sacrificial living. This is one of the things that we get out of living sacrificially. No guilt in life, no fear in death. And notice, Paul's life review doesn't read the way a typical obituary does. He doesn't mention all of his education, of which he had a ton. Doesn't mention his jobs or his achievements or all the churches that he's planted. He doesn't say, I won the fight, I got first place in the race. He says, I fought it and I finished it. Unlike our East Side culture, Jesus doesn't ask us to be successful. He asks us to be faithful. And if we have been trying to follow him sacrificially, maybe not perfectly, because none of us do it perfectly, but faithful, we can be assured of hearing from him what he says to Paul here, well done, well done. A number of years ago, one of our elders volunteered to review our church's bylaws. Talk about sacrificial living, right? Like, there is no greater love than that a man would review his church's bylaws. And he found some typos. And one place was talking about how elders should have really strong character. And it said all elders should be flameless in their lives. And he brought it to me and he said, in general, I support having non-combustible elders. But I think what he meant is blameless. And I wanted to say, oh, no, they meant flame. We're Presbyterian. They meant flameless, right? Like without vigor or passion, right? But here's the thing. You don't have to be 100% blameless in life, because nobody is. But hopefully we are never flameless. Hopefully we are always on fire with a passion to follow Jesus all the way to the end, which is Paul here. At the end of his life, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. And those are really inspiring words, and they're read at funerals all the time. And what a great last thing for Paul to write, right? This is where the director says, and scene. This is where the credits roll. This is where you end the sermon, Paul, on a high note. But like so many preachers, he doesn't know when to stop talking. And so he just keeps going. And what follows is, I got an amen from Sergio. And what follows is, it's a little kind of depressing, right? Like, Paul, you were doing so well in your sermon, and then you just kind of took this kind of depressing route. But actually what he's doing is he's just getting real honest with his good friend Timothy about living sacrificially for Jesus isn't always easy. And sometimes it hurts. And he's just getting real honest about that with Timothy. But more importantly, also the bigger thing he received from Jesus as a result of his sacrificial living. So he says, do your best to come to me quickly. Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. You can hear Paul's loneliness, right? He's alone. And why did Demas abandon Paul? It wasn't because he stopped believing in Jesus. It's because he loved the things of this world. Success, being well-liked, money, comfort, entertainment, all of which killed his passion for Jesus. He chose the comfortable life over Jesus' rescue mission. You can have a big life or you can have a comfortable life. You can have a big life or you can have a comfortable life. You pick. Paul made a lot of sacrifices, but in return, he got a much bigger life, which we see in the next verse. Get Mark and bring him with you because he's helpful to me in my ministry. Now, you could blow right past that as just another name in this passage that has a lot of names, but this name is super important because decades earlier, way back in Acts chapter 15, Paul thought that Mark was such a disaster of a leader, he refused to take Mark with him on one of his missionary journeys, and he wasn't very nice about how he did it either. But now he asked for the man that he rejected years before because obviously there's been some kind of healing, some kind of reconciliation, which is another reward we get for living sacrificially as Paul did. We get to see Jesus' power to mend broken things, which is part of that bigger life that Paul lived. When we sacrifice our pride and say, I'm sorry, we see relationships get healed. When we sacrifice our time, money, and influence for God's rescue mission, we see people come alive as they experience Jesus' love for them. We see the poor empowered, the lonely in community, racism ended, bullies silenced, the vulnerable defended, and joy increased. That's the bigger life Paul got because he lived sacrificially. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas and my scrolls. Alexander the metal worker did me a great deal of harm, whoever he is, right? The Lord will repay him for what he has done. Yeah, like for the next 2,000 years, people will read this passage and think, stupid Alexander the metal worker. At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. So he felt abandoned by his friends, which may happen to us if we live sacrificially for Jesus. A friend may start spreading untrue rumors about us or take credit for something we did, or the people who we thought were on our team suddenly disappear when things get hard. And those things hurt. And Paul faced that. But what's the bigger thing he got? But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. And the language here is really vivid. This is not a theology of Jesus' presence. This is lived experience. Jesus standing right next to him. And in the original Greek, the word used for strength is dunamai, which is the word from which we get our word dynamite. He says, Jesus put dynamite power into me. And many of you have experienced this. The stories I've told of people who've lost their jobs or lost a child or face a terminal illness and yet experience Jesus' presence in ways they never have before. When we live sacrificially for Jesus, he goes from theory to lived experience. And then nothing scares us, not even death, and we're never alone because he's never going to let go of us. Jesus stood with me so that, back to our definition, sacrificial living is letting go of something so that we can experience God's bigger thing, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. Which is another thing that Paul and we get when we live sacrificially, and that is he left a legacy. Now, he wasn't successful by the world's standards. Like, you can't imagine parents showing pictures of their kids and them going, oh, look, here's Paul. He's in prison for treason. We're so proud of him, right? So he wasn't successful by the world standard, but he was significant, and he made a difference. Because he was put on trial, Gentiles, that is non-Jews, got to hear the good news about Jesus, which is what his whole life had been about. It was Paul who took the good news of Jesus from the backwater province of Judea and spread it throughout the entire Roman Empire. From there, it went to the whole world and is still going to the whole world, which then gave rise to things like human rights, the rights of women, hospitals, orphanages. All of that came out of Christianity. Because of Paul, billions of people will live forever in an eternal relationship with the God who loved them enough to die for them. Was the sacrifices he made to make all that happen worth it? Yeah. Legacy is always worth it. Now, some of you might be thinking right now, well, what if I don't feel successful or significant? Like, I don't feel significant. Don't. That's the East Side talking. Just like, no, shut up, East Side, right? Here's the thing. You don't have to do something huge to be significant. That's putting our culture standards of success onto God. No. Jesus' promise is that if we follow him sacrificially, he will make our lives significant, whether we see it or not. And I'll give you an example in a minute. At the time Paul's writing this, he doesn't know he's changed the history. He doesn't know he's changed history. He just thinks he's in prison about to die. And then Paul ends his letter with kind of sad, but I think also very moving words. Come before winter. Come before winter, Timothy. I love you. I miss you. I want to see you before I die. See, Timothy was a younger man that Paul met as a result of living sacrificially and all the mission work he did. He got connected to Timothy, who was a younger man. Timothy was like a son to him, and Paul was like a father to Timothy. Was it worth it? Yeah, because he got a deep friendship. Not just buddies, no. They were on mission together, side by side, to heal the world through the power of Jesus, and that's super cool. So, to review, what's the bigger so that Paul received from sacrificially living to fight that good fight? Well, no guilt in life, no fear in death, a big life that changed the world, broken things being mended through the power of Jesus, Jesus' real presence, legacy of lives transformed, deep friendships. Not a bad list. Was it worth it? Oh, yeah. Every day of the week and twice on Sunday for that list. So, there are 2 action steps for this week. The first action step is be encouraged. Like, that's the main point of my sermon. Just like so many of you are living sacrificially, well done. Keep at it. Keep going. Well done. And be encouraged that whether you see it yet or not, it's worth it. It's worth it. And then second, be prepared. Because in a few weeks, later in March, we're going to give all of us a chance to write down something that we feel God is asking us to let go of so that we can experience something better that he wants to give us. And then we're going to put those up in the lobby so that we can all see that we're not alone in living sacrificially, but we're part of a community that's doing the same thing. But that needs to be a thoughtful, prayerful choice. So we've prepared a guided prayer bookmark. It's out in the lobby. It's on the tables out there. It's also on our website. And it's a step-by-step prayer guide to help you hear from Jesus over the next several weeks what he might be asking you to let go of so that he can give you something better. So those guided prayer bookmark out there on the tables, grab one, don't leave without getting one, and then use it over the next couple weeks. As I said earlier, this passage is one of my favorites in the Bible, and there's a reason for that. Years ago, when I was a college pastor, one of the interns on my staff, his father was a pastor, and one time his father was visiting, and his father asked me, how's ministry? And I said, oh, it's great. It's fine. It's great. Now, at the time, I was actually super discouraged. Like, the students were complaining to me about, well, everything. And I was getting a lot of harsh comments and difficult things like that. Lots of stuff wasn't working. I felt like a failure. I'd given up a career as a professor, which, just to get complained at all the time, which at the moment did not seem worth it. But I didn't want to tell him all of that. So I just said, ministry, it's fantastic. Praise the Lord. And he said, no. How's ministry? And I said, oh. How's ministry? That's the question you're asking. Well, since you ask, it sucks. I'm actually kind of miserable right now. I hate it. And I don't know why I gave up my other career. And he said, yeah, I get it. I've been there. Go home and read the end of 2 Timothy. And remember, these are the last words the Apostle Paul ever wrote. So I went home and I read these verses and I started to get tears in my eyes. Because I realized here's Paul at the end of his life. He's been beaten, he's been rejected, he's been thrown in prison, and now he's about to die just for sharing the good news of Jesus. The churches that he's planted are a mess. The Galatians are mangling the gospel quite literally. The Corinthians, holy cow, they were such a disaster, sleeping with their stepmother, coming drunk to communion. Sometimes I want to change our mission statement, BelPres, at least we're not the Corinthians, right? Like aim high, right? So and all this is going on, and all he asks for is his coat because he's cold, his books because he's bored, and Mark because he's lonely. And it looks to all the world, and maybe even sometimes to Paul himself, that his life's work has been a complete failure. But what he did not know was that 2,000 years later, in a place called California that he never heard of, on a continent called America that he didn't even know existed, a young, discouraged college pastor would find enormous comfort in his words. He did not know that he was going to change my life. He just thought he was in prison, about to die. And these verses always remind me of a coworker of mine decades ago who I've told you about before, who played the key role in me going from being an atheist to a follower of Jesus. Simply because she went to the store one day and bought a Band-Aid on her break to put on my arm, which I had burned very badly, which was a sacrifice for her of time, but more importantly, it was a huge risk because, see, I made fun of her all the time for being a Christian. So in getting that Band-Aid for me, she risked being ridiculed by me yet again. But her act of kindness set me on a year-long journey of exploring who Jesus is. Now, I quit working there soon after that incident. I don't remember her last name. I couldn't find her if I tried. I know her first name was Margie. That's all I know. So she doesn't know. She doesn't know I became a Christian. She doesn't know that I'm a pastor. She doesn't know that I lead a church that has done things like started Jubilee Reach that's getting families out of poverty, or the Center for Champions that's gotten over 1,000 kids in Rwanda off the streets and into productive lives. Now, that took all of us to do that together, but I got to be the spokesperson for all of that. She has no idea. She has no idea. But in heaven, I'm going to hunt her down. And I'm going to take some of those Rwandan kids with me. That is, if they don't run right past me to get to her first. And I'm going to say, Margie, you went to the store to buy a Band-Aid for me, and kids in Africa did not die. But as of now, she has no idea. And neither do you. You have no idea how significant you are. No idea how Jesus will use what seems to you like some small act of faithfulness, like buying someone a Band-Aid. No idea how he will use your sacrificial life to create ripples that continue throughout all of time and all of eternity. And just because you don't see it yet doesn't mean it's not significant. And your Father in heaven sees it. And he is saying to you right now, I am so proud of you for fighting the good fight and running the race. Well done. Well done. So exceedingly, abundantly, and very well done, good and faithful servant. Jesus, thank you so much that you call us to let go of things. You call us to sacrifice so that we can experience your bigger, better life. Thank you that you do that, Lord, and then thank you that you see. And thank you that you are the guardian and steward of even our smallest acts of faithfulness, and that you multiply them over time to make big difference in people's lives, whether we see it or not. Thank you that you do all that, Jesus. And Lord, help us this week to hear from you, well done. It means the most when we hear it coming from you. So Lord, in all the sacrifices we're making to try to follow you as best we can, Lord, help us to hear your well done, because we want to keep going. We want to keep pressing in. We want to keep becoming more like you. And thank you that you see. And thank you that you reward. And thank you that you are always with us. In your name, Jesus, amen.